Good afternoon, everyone. In the Bible, we find many examples of weakness, infidelity, and rebellion against God. But interlaced with those examples, we also find examples of faith, virtue, courage, integrity, and strength of character. One thing we don't find in the Bible is an example of anyone who is perfect in character all the time, except for Jesus Christ. Even the heroes and heroines of the Bible had weaknesses and struggled with human faults. As the Apostle Paul wrote, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, from Romans 3 and verse 23. There are lessons that we can learn and should learn from both the bad examples and good examples among people whose names are recorded in the Bible. In today's sermon, I want to discuss one of the outstanding women of the Bible, and I actually plan on giving a series of sermons highlighting some of the outstanding women of the Bible. But this will be the first. In today's world, where there are those who seek to deny and negate any and all differences between the sexes, more and more people in the world today are utterly confused about gender and an unfortunate minority have trouble figuring out even if they're male or female. Even children are being chemically castrated in the name of political correctness in today's world. A judge and jury in Texas recently ruled over the objections of a boy's biological father that his son be placed in the sole custody of his non-biological mother, because he was born of a surrogate, evidently, but his non-biological mother is a doctor who wants to transform the boy into a girl using endocrine disrupting chemicals. In other words, chemical castration. And this reminds me of what the Nazis were doing during World War II, with some of the experiences they were conducting in the Nazi death camps. Even though this is done in the name of political correctness, there's nothing correct about it. It is perverted and it is evil. The American College of Pediatricians, according to an article that appeared on their website in October of 2011, the American College of Pediatricians is alarmed, and I'm quoting here, by the increasingly prevalent and unscientific trend to treat gender identity disorder in children as an inborn trait rather than as the treatable psychological condition that it is, end quote. In any case, a boy cannot be changed into a girl. It is impossible. He might be made a eunuch, but he will never be a girl. All of this confusion is of Satan the devil, and he's having a field day in this and many other aspects of today's prevailing culture. The Bible tells us, however, that God made human beings of two distinct sexes, male and female. And so we read in Genesis 1 and verse 27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. So God created human beings as male and female. The first pair of human beings that God created became man and wife, as we read in Genesis chapter 2. Beginning in verse 22, it says, Then the rib which the Lord God had taken from man he made into a woman, and he brought her to the man. And Adam said, This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. So this was the purpose of creating the sexes, male and female, man and wife, so that they might be able to procreate and have children and families. And there are subtle and distinct differences between the sexes. We need to learn to appreciate not only the fact that there are differences, but also appreciate the differences. There are distinct differences between the sexes apart from the obvious anatomical differences. And one difference is that women are on the whole physically weaker than men. But there is no indication that women are necessarily weaker in terms of strength of character than men. Examples of faith, virtue, courage, integrity, and strength of character among both men and women are found in Scripture. And today I want to discuss a particular woman we read about in the Bible, and her name is Sarah. Before God changed her name to Sarah, her name was Sarai. Both Sarah and Sarai are derived from a root word, sarar, which means to rule. The word Sarah actually means princess, or similar concepts, and is related to the word Israel, which means Prince of God. In Genesis 17 and verse 15, God said to Abraham, Genesis 17 verse 15, "As for Sarai your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. And I will bless her and also give you a son by her. Then I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall be from her." So she was to become a mother of nations from which would spring kings and rulers. We're admonished to look at the example of Abraham and Sarah, who were in their old age blessed with a child from whom sprang the physical nation of Israel, and whose seed include all the faithful. We read in Isaiah 51 and verse 1, Isaiah 51 and verse 1, "Listen to me, you who follow after righteousness. You who seek the Lord, look to the rock from which you were hewn, and to the hole of the pit from which you were dug." In other words, what he's saying is, look to your origins. He goes on to say, "Look to Abraham, your father, and to Sarah, who bore you. For I called him alone and blessed him and increased him." So we need to study and we need to think about and consider our origins, our physical origins, our spiritual origins, and if we are either physical Israelites or converted Christians, those origins can be traced back to Abraham and Sarah. And actually, not only the physical Israelites, but several other nationalities can also be traced back to Abraham. Paul wrote of the promise to all the seed to whom the blessings of Abraham ultimately apply in Romans 4, beginning with verse 16. He said, "Not only to those who are of the law," now he's speaking here of the physical Israelites, "not only to those who are of the law, but also to those who are of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all." So what Paul is saying here is that the father of us all, whether physical Israelites or Gentiles who are of the faith, we are all, in a sense, children of Abraham. It goes on to say in verse 17, "As it is written, I have made you a father of many nations, in the presence of him whom he believed, God, who gives life to the dead and calls those things which do not exist as though they did." End quote. God had made a promise to Abraham. We read in Genesis 12 and verse 1, now the Lord had said to Abram, and this was Abraham's name before it was changed to Abraham later, but the Lord had said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family, and take your father's house to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. Lot was his nephew, and Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Actually, according to what Stephen said in Acts chapter 7, God had spoken to Abraham, or Abram, even before he moved to Haran with his father and with his wife and nephew. We read in Acts chapter 7 and verse 2, Acts 7 and verse 2, the God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Haran, and said to him, get out of your country and from your relatives and come to a land that I will show you. Then he came out of the land of the Chaldeans and dwelt in Haran, and from there, when his father was dead, he moved him to this land in which you now dwell. And God gave him no inheritance in it, not even enough to set his foot on. But even when Abraham had no child, he promised to give it to him for a possession and to his descendants after him. So, as Stephen pointed out, Abraham dwelt in the land of Canaan, but he was a stranger. He was a foreigner, a pilgrim there, and a sojourner. And the only land that he actually owned during his lifetime, evidently, was a little plot of ground that he bought in which to bury his wife. But God had promised Abraham in Genesis 13 and verse 16, God had promised Abraham, I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth. So that if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your descendants also could be numbered. So Abraham had a wife, but he had no child when that promise was made. Abraham and Sarah shared their faith in God. Sarah remained barren for many years until past the natural childbearing age. And still they did not have the child through whom the promises God had made to Abraham concerning his descendants would be fulfilled. Yet Abraham continued to have faith in God's promises. And as it says in Genesis 15, verse 6, Genesis 15, verse 6, he believed in the Lord and he accounted it to him for righteousness. So Abraham had faith. He believed God's promises even when he could not really see how they were going to come about. And so, as Abraham is called the father of those of the faith, so women of faith are called daughters of Sarah. As we read in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 6, where Peter wrote, if you do good and are not afraid with any terror. You're daughters of Sarah if you do good and are not afraid with any terror. In other words, Sarah, like Abraham, is an example of faith and godly character that is worthy of emulation. When Abraham was 99 years old, God appeared to him to confirm the covenant, as we read about in Genesis chapter 17. Genesis 17, verse 15, God said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. and I will bless her and also give you a son by her. I will give you a son by her. Then I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of peoples shall be from her. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said in his heart, shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? And shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? Now, this was not an expression of doubt or disbelief on Abraham's part, but rather an expression of joy and wonder as God revealed to him how his promises were going to be fulfilled, beginning with a profound miracle. A short time later, God again appeared to Abraham, and we read about it in Genesis 18 verse 1. Then the Lord appeared to him by the terebinth trees of Mamre, as he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. So he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men, they appeared to be men, were standing by him, and when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the ground and said, my Lord, if I have now found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Abraham thought these 3 men were just sojourners passing through, but he was a hospitable person, and inviting someone in that circumstance to share a meal was a custom in that culture, especially. And so he said, if I've found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Please let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will bring a morsel of bread that you may refresh your hearts. After that you may pass by, inasmuch as you have come to your servant. They said, do as you have said. So Abraham hurried to the tent to Sarah and said, quickly make ready 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes. And Abraham ran to the herd, took a tender and good calf, gave it to a young man, and he hastened to prepare it. So he took butter and milk and the calf which he had prepared and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree as they ate. And then they said to him, where is Sarah, your wife? So he said, here in the tent. And he said, that is, one of these men, is actually God who was there, who appeared to Abraham to be a man. And he said, I will certainly return to you according to the time of life, and behold, Sarah your wife shall have a son. Sarah was listening in the tent door, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old and well advanced in age, and Sarah had passed the age of childbearing. Therefore Sarah laughed within herself, saying, after I have grown old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also? And the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I surely bear a child since I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, no, but you did laugh. So Sarah was having a difficult time believing what she was hearing. And Abraham had tried to solve the dilemma of not having a child sometime before by arranging to have a child by her handmaid, by proxy, so to speak. They had arranged to have a child by her handmaid, Hagar. So Ishmael, the child of Abraham and Hagar, was born. Now, in that culture, since Hagar was Sarah's handmaid, it would have been legally considered to be, in a sense, her child as well. But it was not God's intention to fulfill the promises to Abraham and his descendants through Ishmael. Although God told Abraham that the descendants of Ishmael would be many and they would become a great people. And the Arab nations traced their descent to Ishmael. Now, God did not punish Abraham and Sarah for trying to work out this promise their own way. They believed that what God had told them that would be true. They just couldn't see how it was going to be done. So they were trying to figure out a way to make this work. But God made it clear that he had a different plan in mind. And he let them know what that way was and what that plan was when the time came. Being reassured of God that she would indeed bear a child under the improbable circumstances facing her, Sarah believed God's promise. And so we read in Hebrews 11 and verse 11, Hebrews 11 and verse 11, by faith, Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past the age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man and him as good as dead were born as many as the stars of the sky, for a multitude innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. Sarah, from the time she married Abraham, was faithful to him. And as Abraham obeyed God in faith, Sarah did also. After Abraham came to the land of Canaan, where God told him the land would be given to his descendants, a famine struck the land, and Abraham went down to Egypt because of the famine. And as it tells us in Genesis 12, beginning in verse 10, Genesis 12, verse 10, now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was severe in the land. And it came to pass when he was close to entering Egypt that he said to Sarai his wife, indeed I know you are a woman of beautiful countenance. Therefore it will happen when the Egyptians see you that they will say, this is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will let you live. Please say you are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, and that I may live because of you. So it was when Abram came into Egypt that the Egyptians saw the woman, that she was very beautiful. The princes of Pharaoh also saw her and commended her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. He treated Abram well for her sake. He had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male and female servants, female donkeys and camels. But the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister? I might have taken her as my wife. Now therefore, here is your wife. Take her and go your way. So Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. So we see that Abraham's faith was not always perfect. Abraham was a man of faith, but his faith was not always perfect. He feared for his life when he went into Egypt because of the circumstances. What he did in putting his wife Sarah into such a compromising situation was certainly not motivated by godly faith and was a moment of serious weakness. Yet God mercifully intervened for both Abraham and his wife. And what is also remarkable is the willingness of Sarah to follow Abraham's suggestion to save his life at her own peril. And this really was not necessarily wise on the part of either one of them. They did something similar at a later time, as we read about in Genesis chapter 20. Genesis 20 and verse 1, "And Abraham journeyed from there to the south and dwelt between Kadesh and Shur and stayed in Gerar. Now Abraham said of Sarah his wife, 'She is my sister.' And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, 'Indeed, you are a dead man because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a man's wife.' But Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, 'Lord, will you slay a righteous nation also? Did he not say to me, she is my sister?' And she herself said, 'He is my brother.' In the integrity of my heart and innocence of my hands, I have done this." And God said to him in a dream, "Yes, I know that you did this in the integrity of your heart, for I also withheld you from sinning against me. Therefore I did not let you touch her. Now therefore restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not restore her, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours." So Abimelech rose early in the morning, called all his servants, and told all these things in their hearing, and the men were very much afraid. And Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, What have you done to us? How have I offended you that you have brought on me and my kingdom a great sin? You have done deeds to me that ought not to be done. Ought not to be done. Then Abimelech said to Abraham, "What did you have in view that you have done this thing?" And Abraham said, "Because I thought surely the fear of God is not in this place, and they will kill me on account of my wife. But indeed she is truly my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother. And she became my wife." So Sarah was, in fact, Abraham's half-sister. He left out the important fact that she was also his wife. And going on to verse 13, it came to pass when God caused me to wander from my father's house that I said to her, "This is your kindness that you should do for me in every place where we go, say of me, he is my brother." Then Abimelech took sheep and oxen and male and female servants and gave them to Abraham, and he restored Sarah his wife to him. And Abimelech said, "See, my land is before you, dwell where it pleases you." Then to Sarah he said, "Behold, I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Indeed, this vindicates you before all who are with you and before everybody." Thus she was rebuked. So Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech his wife and his female servants. Then they bore children, for the Lord had closed up all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. So both Abraham and Sarah were rebuked for their lapse in faith and honesty. And this shows us that even the best of God's servants, other than Jesus Christ, make mistakes and have made mistakes. Sometimes they've made very serious mistakes. As these were. It would have been better for Sarah, when Abraham wanted her to pretend she was just his sister, to remind Abraham that God had told him his descendants would be blessed with an inheritance, and that in him all families of the earth would be blessed, as God had told him. So she should have said something like, "What do you have to worry about? God will protect you from harm, and I'm not going to lie for you." Fortunately, God is merciful, and he demonstrated his mercy in how he dealt with Abraham and Sarah in these circumstances where their faith was lacking. It was a mark of the hospitality of Abraham and Sarah that Abraham invited 3 strangers to a meal when they appeared nearby at Mamre, which is probably a location about 12 miles south of Jerusalem that we read about earlier. And as we read, they appeared near where he was camping with his wife, and he offered to wash their feet and to let them rest there and to share a meal with them. It's written in Hebrews 13, verse 2. Hebrews 13, verse 2, do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing some have unwittingly entertained angels. Abraham and Sarah hospitably entertained God and 2 angels who appeared to them as men. Now, of course, we need to be careful about whom we invite into our homes, but if the circumstances justify it, we need to be willing to be hospitable even to strangers, especially where there are extenuating circumstances. I remember my wife and I were traveling in Arizona some years ago, and we had a problem with our car, and we had pulled over on the side of a highway. A couple of men stopped to help us, and finally, after a couple of hours or so had passed, or maybe it might have even been longer than that, but we finally were able to solve the problem with their help, at least temporarily. But it was getting on towards evening, and it turned out they said their ranch was nearby, and they invited us to spend the night. We declined as we thought it better to be on our way, but it was a remarkable neighborly gesture in this day and age to have such hospitality offered to us who were perfect strangers to these men. Being hospitable or helping strangers wouldn't always necessarily involve inviting someone into your home. It might be buying someone a meal or helping a person stranded due to car trouble. It was reported in November of this year that a couple in Texas bought a car for a waitress who had served them at a restaurant after they learned that she had to walk 14 miles a day to get to work. So there are various ways that you can apply this principle. And Abraham and Sarah were people who reached out to help people when they had occasion to do so. Finally, Sarah delivered the child God had promised. In Genesis 21 and verse 1, we read, Genesis 21 and verse 1, and the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac, and I believe the name Isaac means laughter, and we'll see the significance of that in a minute. Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him, and Sarah said, God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me. Here meaning laughing with joy. And she also said, "Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? For I have borne him a son in his old age." As we've read, Sarah was an extraordinarily beautiful woman. But what was really important was the beauty of her character. Peter wrote about it in 1 Peter chapter 3. 1 Peter 3 and verse 1, it says, "Wives, likewise be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they without a word may be won by the conduct of their wives, when they observe your chaste conduct accompanied by fear. Do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on fine apparel. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. For in this manner, in former times, the holy women who trusted in God also adorned themselves, being submissive to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters you are, if you do good and are not afraid with any terror." Sarah was respectful and submissive to Abraham, and he in turn treated Sarah with the honor due a faithful wife and a princess. We who are husbands ought to treat our wives the same way. The fact the Bible says the wives are to be submissive does not in any way justify abusive treatment or ill treatment of men in the manner in which they treat their wives. Because we go on and read in 1 Peter 3 and verse 7, 1 Peter 3 and verse 7, "Husbands likewise dwell with them," that is, with your wives, "with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered." In other words, if you're mistreating your wife, then you are cutting yourself off from God. If you want your prayers to be heard, you must honor your wife and treat her with proper regard. Finally, all of you be of one mind, having compassion for one another. Love as brothers, be tender-hearted, be courteous, not returning evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, blessing, knowing that you are called to this, that you may inherit a blessing. For he who would love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. Sarah is just one of a number of women in the Bible who exhibited exemplary character. And as I indicated earlier, in future sermons, I hope to discuss some other examples of faithful and strong women of the Bible.